Surprisingly, over 90% of viewers haven't subscribed yet. If you're enjoying the content, hit that subscribe button. It motivates us to keep creating and helps us never miss an upload. And you'll never miss a story again. I used to believe the worst thing that could happen in a marriage was a fight that never ended. But I was wrong. The worst thing was silence. It started slowly. A missed goodnight kiss, a forgotten anniversary, the way his eyes would drift past me like I was just another piece of furniture in the house. After 11 years of marriage, 2 kids, and 1,000 dinners together, my husband, Mark, no longer saw me. I was invisible in the house I helped build. I spoke, but my voice felt like it echoed in an empty room. I didn't marry Mark for a fairy tale. I married him because I thought love could grow into something solid and lasting. And it did for a while. He was kind, ambitious, and funny in the early days. We were partners. We made promises in a quiet church and believed them. But over time, things eroded. First, the small gestures disappeared. Then the conversations. Then, one day, I realized I couldn't remember the last time he looked at me like he once did. The children kept me going. Sarah was 9, curious and bright, always asking questions. Caleb was 6, soft-hearted and sensitive. They were the light in the endless dusk that had become our home. I never meant to do it. That's what I kept telling myself. The affair started like a spark in dry grass, unexpected and small, but impossible to stop once it caught. His name was Daniel. We met at the community center where I volunteered. He was charming, not in a performative way, but in a way that made me feel seen again, like I mattered. He asked questions and waited for my answers. He remembered the little things, like how I took my coffee or the book I'd mentioned once in passing. We talked. That was all it was at first. A walk after the volunteer shifts, a laugh over a shared joke, a text message that made me smile after another evening of silence at home. Then a lunch. Then a second. Then, the moment I crossed a line I thought I'd never approach. It was not about lust. It was about being alive, being noticed, being real again. But lies are never content to remain small. They grow, twist, spread their roots. It ended 3 months later. I ended it. Guilt was a heavy ghost that followed me to bed each night and woke me before dawn. I saw my kids and thought of the wreckage I was quietly planting. Daniel didn't fight me. He understood, or at least he said he did. I went back to my life with Mark, more broken than before, trying harder than ever to be the wife I was supposed to be. For a while it worked. I put the affair in a box and buried it deep. We even took a weekend trip to the lake with the kids. I began to think maybe that box would never be opened. But the past doesn't like being buried. Daniel came back. I didn't know how or why, only that he texted me out of nowhere after 6 months of silence. Just one message. I miss you. I ignored it, deleted it. But it was too late. Somehow, Mark saw it. Or maybe he had already suspected and just needed confirmation. Either way, everything shattered. He didn't scream. Mark was never the kind to raise his voice. Instead, he sat me down at the kitchen table one evening after the kids had gone to bed. His hands were clasped, his expression unreadable. "Tell me the truth," he said flatly. "How long?" I remember the ringing in my ears, the rush of heat and cold, shame and dread. I could have lied, maybe. But something in his eyes told me he already knew. He just wanted to hear me say it. 3 months, I whispered. His silence was deafening. He stood up, walked to the sink, and stared out the window for what felt like a full hour. Then he said something that chilled me to my bones. "You think this is over? But it's just beginning." The revenge wasn't loud. It was methodical, calculated, a subtle unraveling of everything I had left. First, it was the bank account. He froze the joint funds. I had no access to money. Then it was the lawyer, one of the best in town. He filed for separation and full custody. claimed I was unstable, dangerous, unfit. I thought he wouldn't go that far. I was wrong again. Then came the rumors. Whispered stories spread through our friends, our neighbors, twisted versions of what happened. Versions where I was reckless, irresponsible, cruel. I lost my job at the community center after an anonymous complaint. Then came court. I sat in that sterile room, my hands trembling as Mark's attorney painted a picture of me that was unrecognizable. They brought up Daniel, subpoenaed him. He denied contact since the affair, but the damage was done. I was accused of neglect, of moral failure, of being an unstable influence on my children. I cried through the testimony. But tears don't win legal battles. Mark got temporary custody. I was granted limited visitation, supervised. I watched my babies leave the courtroom with their father and wanted to scream until my voice was gone, but I didn't. I stood and walked out because breaking down in front of them would only give him more ammunition. After that, I fell. I moved into a tiny one-bedroom apartment. Took a part-time job cleaning offices. I couldn't afford therapy, but I wrote letters I never sent. To the kids, to Mark, to myself. I saw the kids every other weekend, always supervised. Always with someone watching, noting, judging. Sarah wouldn't look me in the eye for weeks. Caleb cried every time he had to leave. I tried to smile, to pretend I was okay, to give them whatever pieces of me I could. But I wasn't okay. I lost myself. There were nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how one choice could destroy an entire life. But the truth is, it wasn't one choice. It was 1,000 small ones, layered over years of neglect, pain, silence. I hit rock bottom on a rainy Thursday. My umbrella broke on the way home. I stood soaking in the downpour, groceries spilled in the gutter, no money to replace them. And I just stood there, crying in the street, not because of the rain, not because of the lost food, but because I didn't know who I was anymore. But rock bottom has a strange clarity to it. In that moment, I knew I had two options: let the darkness win or fight. I chose to fight, not for Mark, not for the marriage, but for myself, for my kids, for the right to be more than my worst mistake. Fighting, I learned, doesn't always mean standing tall with fists clenched. Sometimes it means showing up when you're exhausted, when you're ashamed, when you're scared. I started with what I had. I reached out to a local women's support group, even though my pride told me not to. I walked into that room thinking I didn't belong, thinking I wasn't that kind of woman. But the truth is, no one plans to end up in pieces. We just do. And that group, filled with women who had lost jobs, homes, custody, love, they didn't judge me. They listened. One of them introduced me to a legal advocate who offered to help me review my case. She believed the court's ruling was extreme. Judges make mistakes, she said, and stories like yours, they're more common than you'd think. That was the beginning of something new. Not a miracle, not a sudden reversal of fortune, but a path. I filed to revise the custody order. It wasn't easy. Mark opposed it with everything he had. His lawyer sent scathing letters. He claimed I was trying to manipulate the system, that I hadn't changed, that I didn't deserve a second chance. But I had documentation now, letters from my employer, notes from my counselor, references from the support group. Most importantly, I had started seeing a therapist who helped me understand the layers of guilt, invisibility, and resentment that had shaped my choices. When I walked into that courtroom again, I didn't wear defeat like a cloak. I stood straighter. I looked the judge in the eyes. Mark was there, of course, polished, calm, composed, but something had shifted. Maybe he noticed it too. There was a moment in the hearing I'll never forget. The judge asked me directly, "Why should the court believe you've changed?" I paused. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wanted to speak the truth clearly. Because I'm no longer hiding from the truth, I said. I made a mistake, a terrible one. But I've taken every step to fix what I broke. I've faced the consequences. I've stayed within every order, attended every supervised visit. I haven't once missed seeing my children, even when it hurt. And I'm not asking for full custody. I'm asking for the right to show my children that people can grow, that their mother isn't perfect, but she is still worthy of their love. There was silence in the courtroom after that. I don't know if I moved the judge, but I moved myself. I heard my own voice, strong, unshaking, and I believed myself for the first time in months. The court didn't grant full custody, but it did approve a gradual increase in unsupervised visitation. That was the first real win I'd had in a long time. The first day, Sarah and Caleb came to my apartment without a supervisor watching over us. I cooked their favorite meal, spaghetti with garlic bread and chocolate pudding. Sarah sat stiffly at the table for the first 20 minutes. Caleb clung to his backpack like it was armor. But as the hours passed, the walls began to crumble. Sarah asked about a book she'd left at my place months ago. Caleb asked if he could sleep over one day. I told them maybe soon. Later that night after they had gone, I cried, but not out of sorrow. It was gratitude, hope, something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. But peace is never permanent when wounds run deep. A few weeks later, Daniel showed up at my apartment. He said he'd heard about the court hearing, that he wanted to see me, that he still thought about us. I told him to leave, kindly but firmly. I said I was rebuilding my life, and that part of my life, the chaos, the escape, the deception, was over. He nodded, accepted it. At least, I thought he did. But Mark found out. I still don't know how. Maybe someone saw Daniel and told him. Maybe he was watching. But within days, Mark filed another complaint, accusing me of violating boundaries, associating with someone who previously endangered the emotional well-being of the children. It was a stretch, but in custody disputes, perception is power. We were back in court again. The judge was less sympathetic this time. I didn't lose the unsupervised visits, but the progress stalled. Mark was relentless. It all came to a head one day when I picked up the kids and found a note in Sarah's backpack. It was from her. Written in blue ink, her neat little handwriting said, "I miss when we used to be happy. Why can't we go back?" I broke down in my car after reading that, because I wanted the same thing. I would have given anything to undo the pain, to rewind the clock. But the past doesn't offer that gift. All it offers is reflection. That night, I called Mark. He didn't answer, so I left a voicemail. "I know you hate me. I know I hurt you. But please, Mark, let's stop using the kids as the battleground. They deserve more than this war." He never responded, but something shifted. Maybe it was the message. Maybe it was Sarah's note. But the fighting began to slow down, not end, but quiet. A month later, I was called to a mediation meeting. Mark agreed to it. We sat in a room with a facilitator between us. It was awkward, tense, but less hostile. He looked at me for the first time in what felt like forever and said, "I don't trust you. I don't know if I ever will. But I know the kids need you in their lives. So I'll try." Those words, "I'll try," were not forgiveness, but they were a door. Through that door, I began to walk a little more steadily. Sarah started smiling more during visits. Caleb drew me pictures again. I framed one he made of our family, me, him, Sarah, and even Mark. All of us, hand in hand. I didn't erase my past. I faced it. I let the pain shape me, but not define me. I returned to school part-time to finish my degree. I began writing again. Short stories, letters, journal entries. Telling my truth, even if no one else read it. And I never contacted Daniel again. Life didn't go back to what it was before, but it grew into something new, something honest. The road ahead was still long. Custody wasn't equal yet. Financial independence took time. Trust from everyone, including myself, was a slow rebuild. But I was no longer invisible. I was no longer ashamed. I had fallen, but I had also risen. Not for redemption, not even for Mark, but for Sarah, for Caleb, for the woman I had once buried under guilt and silence. She was back, and she was ready to finish what she started. I used to believe that redemption was a single moment, a courtroom victory, a heartfelt apology, a tearful reunion. But I learned that redemption is quiet. It lives in the little choices made every day. It's slow, it's difficult, but it's real. Months passed, then a year. The visits with Sarah and Caleb grew into shared weekends. We baked cookies, painted walls in the apartment, watched old movies with popcorn on the couch. There were still moments of tension, when Sarah pulled away, or Caleb asked why their father seemed sad when they talked about me, but those moments didn't destroy me like they used to. I had become stronger. Financially, I was stable again. I worked as a program coordinator for a nonprofit that helped women re-enter the workforce. They knew my story. I told them the truth during my interview, and they hired me anyway. I finished my degree online, one class at a time. I had dreams again. Small ones, maybe, but dreams nonetheless. I was becoming a person my children could be proud of. A person I could be proud of. Then something unexpected happened. I received a letter from the court. Mark had filed to amend the custody agreement, this time to allow shared custody. Equal time, equal decision-making, equal responsibility. I didn't believe it at first. I thought it was a mistake, a trick. But when we met with the mediator again, I saw it in his eyes. This wasn't manipulation. This was surrender. Not in defeat, but in understanding. Mark said very little during that meeting, just this. You've done the work. I've seen it. The kids are better when they're with you. I was angry, but it's time to stop punishing you. I couldn't find words. My throat was tight. I only nodded, tears brimming in my eyes. That agreement changed everything. Sarah began staying over during the week. We worked on her science fair project together. Something about solar panels and clean energy. Caleb joined a reading group, and I took him to the library every Thursday. Our lives began to sync again. Not as a whole family under one roof, but as two homes filled with love and care. One night, while putting Caleb to bed, he said, "Mom, I'm glad you're happy now." I can feel it. I kissed his forehead, holding back tears. I'm glad you can. But redemption isn't only about healing relationships with others. It's about healing the one with yourself. That was the hardest part. The guilt still whispered sometimes, usually late at night. When the apartment was quiet and my thoughts were loud, I would remember the moment I crossed that line, the first message from Daniel, the look in Mark's eyes when he found out. But instead of spiraling, I spoke gently to myself. You made a mistake, but you are more than your mistake. You broke something, but you worked to repair it. You hurt people, but you chose truth and healing, even when it was hard. That voice, the one that used to shame me, began to sound more like a guide, less like a judge, more like a companion. Then came the day of the final custody hearing. It was mostly a formality, but I was still nervous. I had asked for one last adjustment, the ability to make medical and educational decisions equally. It would complete the joint custody arrangement. Mark agreed. The judge, now familiar with both of us, smiled gently when issuing the final order. Sometimes, she said, the court gets to witness not just conflict, but growth. That line stayed with me. Outside the courthouse, Mark and I stood together while the kids waited in the car. Thank you, I said, meaning it more than I'd ever meant anything. He nodded. You're not the same person you were 2 years ago. Neither are you, I said. We weren't friends, we might never be. But there was respect again. A fragile peace. That summer we decided to take the kids on a trip, together. Just a weekend camping trip, nothing dramatic. Mark stayed in his own cabin. I had mine. But we sat around the same fire, roasted the same marshmallows. We laughed carefully at Caleb's jokes. Sarah took pictures with her instant camera, telling us to act natural. When we got home, She gave me one of those photos. All four of us smiling, not forced, not broken, just together. For that one moment, I framed it. Years passed. Sarah graduated middle school and gave a speech about second chances. Caleb built a birdhouse with Mark and brought it over to show me. I clapped like it was the greatest masterpiece in the world. Life was still imperfect, it always would be, but it was also full, messy, beautiful, and real. I started writing again, seriously this time. A blog, then essays, then a book. It was about starting over, not just after betrayal, but after betrayal of yourself. It wasn't just a story about an affair or a marriage. It was about the quiet rebellion of rebuilding. One day, I was invited to speak at a local conference on resilience. I stood in front of a room full of strangers and told the truth, the whole truth, about who I had been, who I had become. And afterward, a young woman came up to me in tears and whispered, "I thought I was alone." I took her hand and said, "You're not." And for the first time in a long time, I felt peace, not because everything had been fixed, but because I had faced the worst and survived. I had walked through the fire and come out the other side, burned, yes, changed, yes, but still standing, still loving, still here.